Hello YouTube, Chris the Frugal Audiophile with you. Today we are talking about the Roku wireless speakers and sub. So I want to go through the design and features of both of these products, and then I will go through my review for you today. So let's start out with the wireless speakers, and you see them right here before you next to me in the shot here. They are fairly compact, as you can tell. Here's my hand up against it. So that kind of shows you what size they are. So I will put on the screen some of their design elements and features for you to look at. I will not cover all of them in my discussion here, but you will see the rest that I don't cover on the screen. So to begin with, you're looking at basically a 5" by 5" by 7 3/4 inch speaker. Not exactly, but pretty close to it. So it's a nice compact size. I actually like its size. It makes it more convenient for placement. And together, they weigh 4 pounds. So you're looking at 2 pounds a speaker. So these basically have a plastic resin, die cast, whatever you want to call it, housing. It's not metal, but the plastic, you can hear very plasticky sounding type of speaker. And then they have a fabric grill basically on the front half of the speaker. And I will try to get you a shot so that you can see how that looks as well. It's a nice, attractive design. I do like it. Now, it lists them as black on their site, but, in daylight, they look more like dark charcoal gray to me. That's true for a lot of things that come in black. That's up for you to decide. Is it black or is it just very dark gray? And these speakers include a 3/4 inch tweeter and then a 3.5 inch, I'm going to call it a mid-range driver. It does get fairly low. We'll talk a little bit about that in the rest of the review, but it's not a deep bass driver. So I'm going to call it a mid-range driver. So it's difficult to find what exactly the power rating is for these speakers, or how much power they can produce and give you for your sound. And what I found on the internet is that it says 80 watts. Now, I don't know if that's peak, if that's RMS. I'm thinking it's probably RMS for both of them together, so 40 watts each is what I'm going to guess is going on with these speakers, but it's hard to say. It is challenging to find specs for both the speakers and the subwoofer in this system. There are a few out there, but there really is not that many, so it's something to keep in mind as I'm going through this here. I did my best without reading through every review available. I did my best to collect some features and specs for you. So there are two wireless technologies built into these speakers. The first is 802.11 AC wireless, and then they have Bluetooth. Now, the Bluetooth, unfortunately, I cannot find any specs on what version of Bluetooth is included in these speakers. I mean, I looked all over, and even on Roku's site, it just says Bluetooth. Judging by my audio test, I'm going to say it's like Bluetooth 4.2, but I have no real scientific reason to back that up. And then they do also have the Wi-Fi, as I said. I think that is how they connect to your smart TV. These speakers only work with Roku TVs and soundbars, and of course the Roku wireless sub. So you cannot connect them to another TV for sound. It has to be a Roku TV. They have to talk to one another. And so you can't just put them in front of a non-Roku TV and expect them to work. There are no audio connections on the back of these speakers. It's just basically a couple of buttons and a power jack, and that's it. So if you have, say, a Samsung TV running Tizen, these are not going to work with it. You could get the Roku soundbar that would work with it because it has EARC, but these will not work with that. They only work with the Roku TV, but they will work with the Roku soundbar as rears. So if you had, say, a Samsung TV, the Roku soundbar, either the regular one or the Pro or whatever it's called, you could hook them up as rears to that system, but they would not work as fronts in that system. Something to keep in mind. Finally, cost on these, $150 a pair. So let's talk about the features and specs of the subwoofer. So to begin, it's basically an 11.5 inch cube. Roku's website listed as 11 3/4 inches in all dimensions. And so that's what we're looking at for size. And now the weight on it is 17.2 pounds. Okay, so, it's not the heaviest I've ever, certainly not, but it's not like the lightest one I have ever seen. And I like the size of it and the look of it. Again, it's plastic housing with that dark gray, blackish coloring to it, and it is a sealed subwoofer. They claim it has a 10-inch driver. I think that's being a little bit generous. I think they're including the mounting ring and the screws and all that in there to make it a 10-inch driver. To me, it looked more like what I'm used to for an 8-inch, but they say it's 10 inches, so we're going to go with that on the size of the driver. And that is a down-firing driver. It's a sealed subwoofer with a down-firing driver. So an interesting topology on the makeup of this subwoofer. It works together to make a decent sub. I'll just say that right out the bat. And now this sub claims to have 120 watts RMS and 240 watts peak. So that is a decent amount of power, especially given its size and the size of that driver. They did not skimp on amplifier power on this subwoofer, and of course it's probably a Class D digital amplifier. That's what most subs have, especially in this price range. And so, they didn't skimp there, and it does show in its performance to a certain extent. The sub has a rated frequency range of 40 to 200 hertz. And I was able actually to get usable output down to about 35 hertz in my room here, because you are going to have some room gain. And that was not placing it in a corner. You'll see in the pictures here where I actually placed it, but I actually got a little bit below 40 hertz, but really when you start getting down to about 35, it really starts to drop off quite quickly and does not leave it a lot of usable output below that 35, 34 hertz range. And the sub also includes that 802.11 AC wireless, and that is why I think that these devices connect to the TV and to each other via Wi-Fi. That is the only wireless connection which the speakers and the sub have in common. Roku's site, it doesn't tell you how they work, it just tells you that they work. It's going to work once you turn them on and put them next to your Roku TV. That's all they tell you. And so that's something that is difficult to figure out, but my determination by just deductive reasoning that they both use wireless AC to connect to both each other and the TV itself, because the sub does not have any Bluetooth included. The sub works with Roku TVs, soundbars, and speakers. I think that you can just connect the sub to a TV. I did actually not try that, so I can't say for certain, but that's the impression I get reading the material. Finally, the sub cost $180, so it is not necessarily the most expensive sub out there, but not the cheapest for something with a sealed 10-inch down-firing in a plastic enclosure. It's about what you expect to pay for something with those features. So the assignment for this system was to be an easy-to-use, attractive setup with audiophile-like sound. So how did it do with its assignment? Well, let's talk about, first of all, what it gets right. Just so you know, I am grading this system as a whole. Okay, so when I talk about all these different things, keep in mind I'm talking about the speakers and the subwoofer paired together. You can just get the speakers and use those, and they are okay, but I really think in order to flesh out the system and use its full potential, you need to get that sub as well, so that that makes it a $330 system total. So think of it in those terms, not as a $150 system, but as a $330 system as we talk about it. All right, so the first thing it gets right is design. I like its minimalistic appearance. I think it is very attractive, and I think it'll fit in with most decor. Maybe not everything. You see, I have it here with some white furnishings, and it looks okay. It does stand out a bit, and you can only get it in one color, so keep that in mind. I like the looks of it. I like the cloth grills on it. The subwoofer is a nice size. It's easy to hide away in a corner. Next, what it gets right is easy setup. So I took the speakers out of the box, I plugged them in, I set them next to my TV, my TCL TV here, and I followed the on-screen instructions. Actually, they give you a sheet with the instructions. I went through that, and it paired up right away. It was a very smooth and streamlined process, and I really appreciate about this. I don't think you have to be a techie in order to pair these speakers with your Roku TV. And once you do that, you can control the speaker's volume with your Roku TV remote. You see it here, this is the remote, and that is one thing I really like about having these speakers, is being able to use one remote to control the TV's functions as well as volume. So that's a nice feature of them as well. And then finally, they have a Bluetooth input. So once you connect to the TV, now you can connect to them via Bluetooth using an external device such as a phone or a tablet or a laptop. And I was able to do that. It's a very easy process. Basically, you go into the remotes and devices setting, you go onto Bluetooth. It will ask you to put your phone into Bluetooth. And so you go onto your phone and you will see the device come up with the name that you have given your Roku TV. I was easily able to connect to it, and then it asked me a confirmation on the TV if I wanted to launch the Bluetooth app, which is kind of weird, but that's what it did. Went into there, and music began to play. Now, the music was not as high a quality over Bluetooth as it was on AirPlay. That's something to keep in mind there. But it does work. If you've got an Android phone that doesn't have AirPlay, you could use the Bluetooth functionality on this device. So next, in the section What It Gets Right, is that I was able to enjoy movies and music on this television. The 3 movies I tested out were 6 Underground on Netflix, and then I also watched Wonder Woman 1984 and Edge of Tomorrow on my Vudu account. I think Vudu has slightly better sound than Netflix, so I wanted to try a couple of movies on there. And I was able to enjoy those movies, watching them with the speakers and the subwoofer paired with this TV. It was a good experience. Was it as good as my 5.2 surround sound system? Well, of course not. Certainly, it was lacking in comparison to that, but it was an enjoyable system, and I'll get more into that and why I didn't enjoy it and my recommendation later on in the video. When I put on some music, I was able to have fun listening to music on the system. I first played Lose Yourself to Dance by Daft Punk, and that song has a decent amount of bass in it, and it was fun. It made me want to dance as I listened to it. And then I put on Chocolate Chip Trip by Tool, which is a good song for testing soundstage, and it did have a decently wide soundstage. I was actually surprised, especially given how close they are together in my room, that I could hear sounds that sound as if they were coming from the sides of the speaker and not just within the speaker. So soundstage width was actually quite good on these speakers. As I said before, AirPlay did sound better than Bluetooth. Bluetooth just sounded a little more compressed, not as much frequency range or dynamic range as AirPlay did. So now let's talk about what it gets wrong, and this is where the fun is going to begin with these speakers. I'm going to try not to totally tear them apart, but I do want to be honest with you regarding my impressions of the speaker and how I think they performed overall, given their assignment. So to begin, this is a closed system. These speakers and sub really only work within the Roku system. Now you can pair the speakers to a sound bar, but if you just have the speakers and the sub, you're going to have a Roku TV, and that is not a Roku device such as a stick or a streaming box. It has to be a Roku TV. For some reason, that's just how Roku is doing it, that they just feel like these are meant to be used with a Roku TV and a Roku TV only. So keep that in mind when you are purchasing that it is a closed system. You cannot use the sub or the speakers without some other Roku device in your system, such as a TV or a soundbar. Let's talk about the sound. Is it audiophile quality or not? Well, I'd say not quite. To begin with, the bass only goes down to about 35, 40 hertz. To me, that's not quite low enough, especially for home theater. Now, for music, that's really fine, but for home theater, I would like it to go a little bit lower. So I did take off some points for that, along with the closed system issues. So I have a frequency sweep file on my phone, an audio file that I got off of audiocheck.net, and I played that frequency sweep, and I could really hear that bass just really begin to drop off around 34, 35 hertz. Around 30, there was really no usable output to speak of, and of course below. So keep that in mind. When I played that opening scene of Edge of Tomorrow, we all know that famous bass note that drops right there within the first few seconds of that movie. I believe it's like 20 seconds in. That was not as impactful as it is on my home theater system. It just didn't quite dig that low. I think that frequency is below 20 hertz. It's like 15 hertz or maybe lower than that. I'm not sure. It's quite low, and this system could not reproduce it to its true fidelity. So something to keep in mind there. Now, it does take fairly beefy and expensive subs to reproduce it to its fullest quality, but this system was not able to. The next issue I'm going to list is sibilant treble. And you know me, I hate my sibilant treble. It pulls me out of the music or the movie, and I don't care for it. These speakers certainly suffered from that. I was listening to Uninvited by Alanis Morissette, and it was so sibilant on that song that I could not enjoy it. I had to turn it off and, well, not turn it off, but skip to the next song. I did not like that about these speakers, and you are going to hear that in the next issue I had, and that is dialogue fidelity issues. Yeah, dialogue does not sound natural on these speakers. Voices, although they sound okay and they're very present, they do not sound natural on these speakers as compared to my home theater system in there. I've heard worse, but I've heard better. And even at this price, I've heard better. I really had to take off some points there. I was watching the opening scene of Wonder Woman 1984. And first of all, the voices were not pronounced enough. Now, I know you can turn up the dialogue enhance on the Roku TV. It's a menu setting in there, and you can enhance the dialogue. So I did that, and it did make it more pronounced, but it also made it sound even less natural. So that's something really to keep in mind with these speakers. If you really are a stickler for natural sounding dialogue, you're not going to get it with the Roku wireless speakers. Next, although soundstage is wide, it's not very deep. So I can hear things coming from, the side of the speakers, but the front to back soundstage is just not there. It is certainly more narrow than its soundstage width. Now, that's often common, especially with sound bars, just because of the way that they are placed. And so, I can't be super critical of that, but it's something to keep in mind. I did take off a little bit of points for that. As I was listening to Chocolate Chip Trip, I was listening for that, front to back as well as left to right soundstage. Left to right was good, and front to back was just missing in that song. And finally, as far as sound is concerned, they really lack in dynamic range. It's not to say that they don't get quiet and loud, but it's more compressed. If, a good sounding home theater is like this, I would say that the Roku wireless speakers are more like this. They do go up and down some, but just not to the extent that a good home theater would do. Or, for example, a audiophile stereo system where someone wishes to play music and hear it in all its glory. You're just not going to get it out of these speakers. They're too small. They probably don't have the most expensive drivers, and I'm not sure all the reasons for it. But there is a very noticeable compressed dynamic range. So I was watching Six Underground on Netflix, as I said before, and the dynamics were just not there. I watched it on my bedroom system a few months ago, and the dynamics were much greater. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, is that going to be true for any speakers or soundbar in this price range? Probably, but I am looking at this as an audiophile and sharing with you my thoughts on it. Is it a competitive audiophile system? We're not talking about it as just a general sound system or soundbar replacement or anything like that. Just looking at it as an audiophile or home theater system. So I have to grade it in that manner, and that's why I'm going to be critical of some of these more nitpicky issues. There are plenty of reviews of these speakers on YouTube and the internet that laud them with praise and say how great they are. They are. They're good. They're a nice set of speakers, and a competitively priced one as well. But they don't quite live up to my audio standards. Maybe they will for you. I'm not saying that, but that's the case for myself. And finally, I think a glaring issue is the lack of audio controls. There is no bass management to speak of. Now, you can turn the bass up and down, but it doesn't really control the level of the subwoofer. Of course, there's no parametric EQ where you can, control the Q of the different frequency ranges. Dream on. But there's really just a treble and a bass control, along with a few other like sound profiles, and of course that dialogue enhance, as I mentioned before. But you are not going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of setting the system up. There's no crossover settings. I don't even believe that when you connect a subwoofer that it enables a crossover in these speakers. So they are still going to be playing frequencies down to probably about 60 hertz, about as low as they go. And I don't know how high the sub is going to play. I'm guessing it plays, past 60 hertz, if not even higher than that. So you're going to have some bleed over in the sound there because you cannot control any type of crossover on this system, which is unfortunate and makes the sound more difficult to manage. I think that it would be nice for Roku to either enable a crossover at a set frequency in these speakers or give you control over that in your system, because every room is going to be different. So let's give these speakers a Frugality grade. Now remember, the assignment was to be an easy to use, attractive system with an audiophile-like sound. And even though it does get some things right, I'm going to give it a C+. And it's a fairly low grade, you know. It's above average, but just barely above average. And I did that largely because of those sound quality issues and just some of the nature of the system with its lack of sound control and the fact that it is a closed system. I don't feel comfortable giving it a higher grade than that. That doesn't mean that it's an awful system and it's not right for somebody, but for my assignment, that is how it did. Which then brings me next into my recommendations for the system. The first one is, if you are looking for a simple, easy to use sound system to pair with your Roku TV, I'd say give these a shot. They're competitively priced, along with the subwoofer especially. It is not a bad system. It really isn't. It's a good system for what it is. But the next recommendation is get the sub. I think that the sub really brings the system to life and it completes the whole sound. And you could use the speakers without it, especially in a smaller room, maybe a room where there is not much interest in deep bass. But I really think it is a must-have if you want the full Roku speaker experience. Next, I recommend this system for a secondary room. Let's say a bedroom or a guest room. I think it'd be a great guest room system. If you've got like a nice 43-inch or 50-inch Roku TV in your guest room and you want a good sound system that's compact, I actually think this would be a great choice because it's easy to set up and it's fairly versatile and it'll work with the existing Roku remote so your guest doesn't have to fiddle with more than one remote. And I think that is a great advantage in a situation such as that. And let's face it, most ears are not going to be as picky as mine or perhaps even as some of yours as well. So that's where I would really recommend this system, is in a secondary type scenario. Finally, if you are looking for the audiophile sound, you're going to have to look elsewhere. Although they don't sound bad, they certainly are not audiophile sounding, and they just lack in their dynamics, in their soundstage, and some of their frequency response. They have those sibilant highs, as I mentioned as well. They are not for the discriminating audiophile ear. Well, there you have it. That's my review of the Roku wireless speakers and matching subwoofer. Do you own the speakers or the sub? What do you think of them? Do you agree or disagree with my findings? Thank you so much for watching this video. Hope to see you soon in the next one. Please check out my Patreon. Buy me a cup of coffee. Link down in the description below. And remember, frugal doesn't necessarily mean cheap.